This is the last word, and I'm Marya Shakil. The Supreme Court has firmly put the onus of safety and well-being of students on the administration of educational institutions, expressing deep concern over the disturbing pattern of rising incidents of students killing themselves. The top court called for an urgent need for a comprehensive mechanism to support students' mental health. Outlining a disturbing pattern of student suicides in educational institutions, the Supreme Court directed the Delhi police to register an FIR and probe the suicidal deaths of 2 IIT Delhi students from the SC/ST community. The court went ahead and formed a national task force to address the mental health concerns of students and prevent suicides in higher educational institutions. The task force will be headed by a former Supreme Court judge and will have high-ranking officer not below the rank of a joint secretary in the education department in each state and union territory of India, and that officer will act as a nodal officer. But the question that I ask on the show tonight, is this coming too little too late? Joining us on the show is also one of the task force members, Professor Kachru. He is not only an educationist himself, he is also an anti-ragging crusader. Rajendra Kachru started an NGO against ragging after he lost his 19-year-old son Aman in 2009, and Aman died after succumbing to injuries which he had sustained following a brutal beating by the seniors. And Professor Kachru was a part of the UGC's anti-ragging committee for nearly a decade. Joining me on the show now, Abhayanand is a founder of Super 30, a renowned educationist. We also have Dr. Deepak Raheja, Director and Chief Psychiatrist at Hope Care India. We also have Advocate Anubha Srivastav Sahai. And Pramod Maheshwari is Founder, Chairman of CEO and MD of Career Point Limited in Kota. I'm going to begin with you, Professor Kachru. Too little, too late, but nevertheless an acknowledgement that something has to be done. And something drastic has to be done.
I don't think it is ever too late. It is not even too little. Any little thing that government or Honorable Supreme Court does is very helpful. We have a definite problem in our campuses. Campuses are highly toxic. And what is very, very concerning is that the prime institutions, whether medical colleges and IITs, and these are also very toxic. You would expect that these institutions would be, there will be a lot of care taken by the administration. So the problem of suicides exists because of discrimination between the students, which was defined in 2009 as ragging, and between students and administration, faculty, and staff, which there is no regulation for it as of now. There is an attempt being made to create some form of a regulation for this, but it's still in a very, very early stages. So, in my opinion, whatever the Honorable Supreme Court has done is a good initial step. And we need to address the suicides is not only a human rights problem, or it's not only a tragedy of the parents and the young boys and girls who kill, but we have to see how many students do not commit suicide, but they are completely broken for life. We are producing a batch after batch of mentally injured people who are going into the workforce. I have many students in the last so many years still talk to me. They have not committed suicide, but they have been shattered, and they are working, and their efficiencies cannot be good as is expected. So it's a major issue. One has to look at the mental health of our campuses. And as of now, not much attention is being paid to this. We had a very good ragging eradication program. For the last 4 or 5 years, that's also slipping. And the number of suicides, it's only 2 days ago or 3 days ago, I was reading in one place that more than 1,000 or 1,200 students left their campuses at medical colleges. It's, as you know, it's not easy to get into a medical college. And in 4 years or 3 years, 1,200 students just left the seat and went So that shows how serious the problem exists, and it's not being addressed. I can tell you very frankly, it is not being addressed, and it should be addressed at the highest levels, from the ministry, from University Grants Commission, Medical Council of India, All India Technical Education, Council of Technical Education. All AICTE did a good job for about a decade. And after a decade, I don't know what happened, they just slept. Usually what happens is when you have a change in administration or change in bureaucracy or change in something, and then these programs slip. All we need is, the other day when I was making a note for the Honorable Supreme Court, I said, please make sure a mechanism exists that insulates these programs from change in bureaucracy. When there is a joint secretary change, or when there's a secretary change, or when there's a chairman change, everything changes. We need to insulate these programs from these changes.
Absolutely. Professor Kachuru, I'll bring in others now. Mr. Abhyanand, the number of suicides among students is only rising. Just look at this very disturbing number. Nearly 13,000 students died by suicide in 2023, of which over 2,000 children died after failure in exams, and the highest number of suicide rates is coming in from states like Sikkim, Kerala and Chhattisgarh. And if we go with this number, it also shows, as Professor Kachuru was saying, that how toxic our campuses are becoming. But overall, the education system is putting so much of pressure on young minds that it's driving them to take extreme steps.
Well, yes, you have cited the figures, and I'm very sure they must be correct to the number. This issue of suicides in campuses, I've never been in the campus recently, but I've talked to students in the format of Super 30, who I take under my care and guide them to get into the IITs and some into the medical colleges. The concept that comes to my mind is, right from the beginning, a child is born to a family. So the family supports the child and the child feels secure. Then when he grows up, 15 plus, maybe 20, he starts seeking the support of the society in which he is now living. So the society for a student becomes the college or the institute, his friends and professors. That becomes really his family. If the family doesn't support him, because he has to go through the ups and downs, if the family doesn't support him and berates him when the performance goes down or something like this happens, then he feels very insecure. This becomes sort of I won't use the word, but a motivator to suicide is not the best word. So when I talk to the students of Super 30 who got into the IIT, they brought out this point. They said, when you get into these institutes, you see the cutthroat competition that takes place. And if you are in that environment, then the chances of the environment becoming very toxic and leading the student to suicide in case of failure of any kind, that becomes very tragic. This I had ensured in my process in Super 30, and the student said that in our process, the 2 years that we studied with you, this cutthroat was not there.
Okay, let's move on and bring in others. Dr. Advocate Anubha, I'm going to come to you now, because there is a need to address mental health concerns, and students, particularly in higher educational institutions, find themselves even more vulnerable. So the support system which is needed has to come from the family as much as it has to come from the institutions. But the task force of this nature, what can it necessarily do? I mean, who are the stakeholders who can come on board for this?
Thank you, Marya, for having me on this show, and very important topic actually. And because the suicide cases are increasing not only in coaching institutes but also in educational institutes, also colleges. And so JEE and NEET aspirants are not only taking their life or committing suicide. The students, after joining the medical institutes and topmost IITs, they are committing suicide. So there is a problem, no doubt, and we have to deal with this mental health crisis. Recently, Rajasthan government has tabled a bill to regulate coaching institutes and also to to deal with the suicide among students in coaching institutes. I have gone through that bill, and I think if we can implement such things as far in educational institutes, as far as this task force is concerned, if at all the educational institutes, most primarily the institutes like IITs, all and then medical colleges and AIIMS and all, where the resident doctors are also committing suicide after completing their graduation in medical college, and hospital, as well as the MBBS students, undergraduate students, they are also committing suicide in medical college. So the target should be IIT all over India. Most of the IIT students, they are committing suicide, and need medical students. So focus should be on these students, because the pressure is right from the beginning. When they are in 8th standard, when they are in 9th standard, they are being forced to this coaching institute, to this culture of coaching. And then there's pressure on students. From parent side, there's a lot of pressure that you have to perform well. There's peer pressure also. Many students commit suicide when they don't qualify for all these entrance exams. Those who qualify for this entrance exam, after joining the colleges, they get to know how difficult it is to even study in these colleges, because they don't get support. They don't get mental support when they are staying in college. So at college level, it is mandatory to have a counselor, though it is mandate is there, but I don't think it is being implemented properly. Okay. So if this national task force should be constituted, no doubt, the national task force should be the appellate authority. But at the same time, at each state level and district level, wherever these institutes are functioning, we must have a counselor appointed, and also a committee appointed at college level, which will take care of
the point here being made by Anubha, and I will take that thought ahead with you, particularly about the students taking this step in a particular. There is no age bracket per se. Even medical students or doctors who have completed their MBBS have died by suicide. My question then is that if it's not if educational institution is what the task force is looking at, but what about workplaces? I mean,
right.
If you are still in that zone of being a student. Dr. Raheja?
So I totally agree that it's not just about the educational institution, but to start from there is not a bad idea. I mean, I think more and more, I've recently been reading articles where people have begun to voice to say that it's high time now that India should have a Ministry of Mental Health. And one of the major constituent that really deplores your mental health is depression and the loss of a life by suicide, to quite an extent which is preventable. Now, as my colleague, co-panelists were saying, a child when he's studying is given the impression that if you go to an IIT or an IIM or a AIMS and you go to a top institution, life will be a cakewalk. When he or she arrives there, they realize that life is not a cakewalk. On the contrary, it's harder. They do not have the kind of support they need, and they almost feel like a pressure cooker. They don't know there is a stigma to mental health. They are expected to act like emotional divas, where talking about mental health is a sign of weakness. You don't know where to look, where to ask for support. And sometimes the lack of sensitivity, and I'm saying it presently in as many words, by parents and by teachers, where mental health crisis or a mental health need is looked down upon, is makes the person feel more worthless, and that sense of worthlessness, hopelessness, gives the person, the student, the strength to maybe in that moment of impulsivity or a long drawn depressive crisis, mental health crisis, decide that life is not worth living. So I think even though this is too late, too little, but I think it's a gesture, it's an act by the Supreme Court which is worth applauding, because it's high time we owe it back to make sure that our educational institutions, pretty much like our homes, are safe places. And that has to begin by sensitizing the teachers to mental health needs and not trivializing it by ridiculing it or rubbishing it to say no, and the child or the student is only assessed on the basis of academic excellence. So in the highly competitive world that the child is growing, he or she is given to understand that if there is academic excellence, everything else will not matter and will fall in place. But for the families also who lose a child, I think it is the most traumatic thing, and it's time. I think the society needs to wake up to make radical measures, including measures that come in the law that are mandated by task force like this, where there are senior judicial officers, there are retired judges, but also with the equal representation by mental health activists and mental health workers, psychiatrists, psychologists,
Yes.
together, who can continue to give back to society, to nip it in the bud, to be able to look at the telltale signs when a student is going through a mental health
Absolutely.
crisis, and to be able to provide the intervention.
One city which has almost become like a suicide capital, unfortunate suicide capital of India, is Kota. And that's from where Pramod Maheshwari is joining us. And Mr. Maheshwari, because we are talking of students taking their own lives, a third-year nursing student in Kerala who attempted suicide in her college hostel in December last year died on Saturday after remaining in coma for 3 months. And students allege that Chaitanya attempted suicide due to mental harassment by the hostel warden. And what's even worse is the fact that the warden was taken into custody only after Chaitanya's death. We have tried talking to her mother, but she's of course too distraught to say anything. That's someone who is working in a was working in a professional setup here. Pramod Maheshwari, steps being taken by multiple state governments. You know, there was a bill that was moved by Rajasthan government. But all these steps need to come together somehow to make that comprehensive I would say a society which is far more accepting the idea of mental health issues.
I think the last point you raise is very important. That is, the stigma around discussing about the mental health. People are not ready to accept that they are under stress. They are not ready to accept that they require some specialist help to get out of the stress. And most of the institution, I run coaching institution, I run university also. And what I believe that in the fast changing world, students are not able to cope up with the changing environment. The students are coming from different background. Few are coming from very good school, from a good family background. Few are coming from rural background, and everybody wants to try to achieve the same. And there is no support system in a way that is an effective support system to address or to listen those students or to handle those students to that difficult time. So the suicides are happening not only because of ragging or because of some kind of assault, but also because of not able to adjust or not able to cope up in an environment. And where I personally believe that help of mental health specialist is required. And I think the step which Supreme Court has taken, Honorable Supreme Court has taken, is very important. It should become mandatory. And not only mandatory, it should be effectively implemented in all the education institution that mental health specialists are necessary part. It should become an integral part of the system, and lot of sensitization is required to among the students, that if you are facing any kind of a challenge, come forward and speak to the people, go and take the assistance. I think that is the only way to address this concern, apart from the various actions the government is taking. As you said, Rajasthan government has put a bill to regulate the coaching institution, but it is more about, providing the quality education, addressing the concerns like fee refund, number of students in the class. But it is more than that. It is not limited to these issues. It is more than that. And perhaps the thought which has started will definitely, the task force will definitely come up with the various solutions, effective solutions, and which will be implemented in a true spirit, among all the educational institutions, be it coaching institution or a college or a school, where in the current changing environment where technology is changing very fast, access to the internet is putting a lot of pressure on students, because there is a real life and there is a real life, and real life is causing a lot of trouble to students. I run a residential school, and the kind of challenge we face, that students are living in the real life, they are not coming to the real life, and we have the permanent psychiatrist available, and she she actually interact with the students, help them to address their concerns. So there are multiple issues, and I think mental health specialist in coaching institution, education institution is the need of
Yes.
ours, and it should be implemented immediately.
Absolutely.
Without further delay.
Professor Kanchu, let me bring you back on this discussion. There are these coaching institutes or almost educational institutions in India which unfortunately are becoming like factories. And students are competing to enter these factories, which essentially means that the kind of pressure that is there and the burden of expectations is very, very high. Do you think there is a larger mindset change which is needed, that it's okay to not get through IIT, it's okay to not be a doctor if you have signed up for a biology in class 12th? It's okay. I mean, that point has to be communicated by parents to their children, and perhaps the entire society should be somehow evolving to say that there's multiple avenues opening up.
First of all, parents, before they convey this message to students, they have to understand it themselves.
Yes.
When they send a kid to Kota or these steamed up institutions, invariably the child resists, but they insist that he has to become a doctor, he has to go or she has to go, and so on. So it's a kind of discrimination that kids face outside the college in the hands of their parents. But when they come into the college, there are two types of suicides. You have outside the college and within the campuses, whether they are schools or whether they are higher education institutions. My experience in the last 10 years, looking at the suicide cases in higher education institutions, shows you a pattern. The pattern is that a person is discriminated against, whether it's a boy or a girl, and we know the pattern also, who is discriminated. It's not necessary to discuss at this point. Once that person is discriminated, he or she seeks justice, and that he or she meets an injustice. And that injustice mounts to state of helplessness. At that point, some people who are able to stand this pressure, they continue. Some people who are not able to stand this pressure, they leave the college. As I told you, 1,200 kids left the college. Even they were in medical schools in 3 years, or 400 or 500 children per year. And those ones who cannot face back home commit suicide. They are the weakest of the lot. So when I was handling the ragging prevention program, I used to send 1 lakh emails every day to parents, not to students, to parents, to tell them, for God's sake, look after your kid. Look at the signs, smallest of the signs, that there is a problem. Do not ignore this. Not every child is the same. Every child is different. And that doesn't mean that this child is suffering from mental health. He's a sensitive child. He cannot stand all this.
Yes.
And when there is a state of helplessness, they reach a point of helplessness. Point here is institution, as a government or as a bodies that are responsible for keeping the campuses healthy, they must nip the bud at the state of discrimination itself.
Yes.
Why should it be discrimination and injustice? Discrimination is there, that people are seeking justice and they meet injustice and they meet resistance and they meet all kinds of problems. That point itself, it has to be stopped. And then it has to be understood the college principals and vice chancellors are also parents.
Yes.
They do not understand. They say, ये कैसे हो सकता है कि एक डॉक्टर आ गया तो ये तो कोई डॉक्टर है ही नहीं, जिसको इतना सेंसिटिव आदमी कैसे बन सकता है डॉक्टर? This is, I have heard many in last 10 years, many doctors saying, if you are a sensitive person, the doctor कैसे बनो? These myths have to be broken by the professional bodies themselves. That a doctor does not have to be an insensitive person.
Absolutely. Professor Kachru, the fact that you're a member of this task force will certainly help others, because you will help them be more sensitive towards this entire issue of suicides by students. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Professor Kachru, Abhyanand sir, Dr. Deepak Raheja, Advocate Anubha, and Pramod Maheshwari. We were speaking about the student, Chaitanya, who attempted suicide due to mental harassment by the hostel warden. She has died after being in coma for 3 months. Her family is heartbroken and distraught after losing a 20-year-old. Here's their story.
A third-year nursing student in Kerala who attempted suicide in a college hostel in December last year died on Saturday after remaining in a coma for 3 months. The tragedy sparked protest among students of Manzoor Hospital and School of Nursing, who accused the hostel management of workplace harassment.
ഈ വിഷയമായിട്ട് ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട് ചെയ്തതിന് തെളിവ് കൃത്യമായി നമുക്ക് കൊടുക്കാൻ സാധിച്ചിട്ടില്ല. കാരണം വാർഡൻ ഈ കുട്ടിയെ ഹരാസ് ചെയ്തു എന്ന് സംശയിക്കപ്പെടുന്നു എന്ന് മാത്രമേ അവർ പറയുന്നുള്ളൂ. പക്ഷേ അവർ ഉറപ്പിച്ച് പറയുന്നില്ല, ഒരു ഉറപ്പ് അവർ പരാതിയിൽ പറയുന്നില്ല. പോലീസായിട്ട് നമ്മൾ സ്റ്റേഷനായിട്ട് ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട സമയത്ത് അവർ പറഞ്ഞ നിലവിൽ അത് ആത്മഹത്യാ ശ്രമത്തിന് ഇപ്പോഴത്തെ നിലവിലെ നിയമസംഹിത വെച്ച് നമുക്ക് കേസെടുക്കാൻ സാധിക്കില്ല. ആത്മഹത്യാ ശ്രമത്തിന് പിന്നെ കുട്ടി മരണപ്പെടണം. അപ്പോൾ മരണപ്പെട്ട ശേഷമാണ് മറ്റു കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ നമ്മൾ ഇനി മുന്നോട്ട് പോകേണ്ടത്.
Based on a statement from Chaitanya's mother, a case was registered against the warden and the warden has been put off duty. But this is of little solace to Chaitanya's family. Chaitanya was the only hope of a struggling family. Her father, a farmer, does odd jobs and could only educate Chaitanya. Chaitanya's siblings couldn't even complete their education. The BJP has blamed Kerala government for inaction. The Congress too pointed out failures in the system.
When the system administration itself, when the hostel warden itself is harassing the students, this is something which have to be taken into account of. When a serious professional institution faces such a challenge, I believe that the rest of the colleges would be even more dramatic. So I believe that this is something which have to be taken seriously.
Kerala government is not doing anything. It's really shocking. The government which says that it is doing a lot on education, this is what is happening in the institutes. I think they should take it seriously and take very, very strict action against people who are involved in these kinds of activities.
The warden has now been taken into custody. NDTV attempted to speak to Chaitanya's mother, but she was too grief-stricken to speak to us. So is that too little too late? NDTV Bureau Report.